everybody, and welcome to our second Nest Builders event. I am Danielle Hunter, the Director of Education here at the Nest, and your host for this evening. Before we dive into a guest that I am incredibly excited to have on here with us tonight, I do want to just extend a special warm welcome to our families who are watching from all across the country and attend one of our many Nest locations. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be able to serve you all and get the opportunity to nurture, love, and educate your young children. So thank you all for being a part of our Nest family. On our second episode, we are bringing in a good friend of ours at the Nest, Amanda Morgan. She is here to discuss the power of play and teaching with intention. We're also going to dive in a little bit to the impact of COVID-19 on child development and learning, and perhaps how play can help us as we navigate a post-COVID world and really try to get back, any missed time we had there. Amanda is a nationally recognized speaker and consultant who has created her own company, Not Just Cute, can be found at notjustcute.com. Here, Amanda works to bridge the gap that exists between decision makers, educators, and parents so that together we can improve the quality of early childhood education, but also really learn to respect and honor and protect the childhood experience. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us tonight and welcome. It's so great to have you. Thank you so much. I do want to give you a couple minutes to just introduce yourself to our viewers. Tell them a little bit about who you are and the work you do with Not Just Cute.
Sure. You did such a great job with the introduction. So Not Just Cute came about, I was working in, my background is in elementary and early childhood education. And then I did my master's degree in human development, focusing on child development. And as I did that, was able to work in the child development lab there at the university. And as I worked with pre-service teachers, part of what I realized was so much of what they would bring with their plans and what they were planning to do in the classroom. They would say, "This is so cute. It's going to be so cute." And that was one of the first times that I started to think, it can't just be cute. It has to be more than cute. And that was part of my job, was to coach them and help them to recognize the intentionality that they needed to bring with that. And so what I do now is just kind of followed through that same vein and helping teachers to understand that the work we do is so much more than cute, and that we need to bring that awareness and intentionality, but also to help parents and decision makers, everyone in this learning community, to understand that the work of early childhood is really, really powerful. And it isn't just about filling up the day, taking the time and making it cute. It's about really recognizing how children learn and grow and making sure that we match what we're doing with that. So that's what I help teachers and parents and educational communities to work towards.
I love that. You certainly sing to my heart when you say just how important the work of early childhood educators are. It's certainly a passion and a deep feeling that I have as well. One of the biggest things, and it's going to lead us right into our first discussion topic, is really looking at play in early childhood, right? Young children spend a lot of time, in many cases, playing, right? Seemingly just playing. Talk to us a little bit about why play matters for early childhood development.
Yeah, so if we're looking from a developmental perspective, we know that children of every culture play. And even beyond our species, if we go to animals, that play is such it's an integrated part of development, that's kind of our first clue that there's something important here. If it's so universal, what is driving it? And some scientists believe that the impulse comes from the base of the brain, the primitive part of the brain that controls things that have to do with survival. And so that leads them to believe that there really is this core survival, this drive to development that is around play. And beyond that, we know several things that play does for humans, but especially for young children. There are a lot that we could talk about. I tend to focus on three. One is that we know that it promotes mental health and wellness, emotional health for young children through play. They develop a lot of those coping mechanisms. They work through a lot of big emotions, a lot of big concepts. One thing that we know is that as play has decreased, we've seen an increase in psychopathological disorders. So there's just a lot of evidence that tells us that play is an important part for children, but really for all of us to be able to maintain emotional and mental health. So that's number one. Number two is that we know that it promotes brain growth and learning. So there's a lot of things, and we'll talk about several of them, a lot of things that children learn through play and a lot of reasons why it's more effective. It literally changes the brain so that it's more receptive and able to learn. But one of the things that we know as well is that during play, the brain secretes different chemicals that allow it to learn better, but also to grow and develop, especially in that prefrontal cortex, which is so important. So that and many other reasons, we know that it's key for really powerful learning and brain development. And then the third one that I usually talk about is how important it is for social development and all those soft skills that we tend to call them soft skills, but they're so critically important. So things like negotiating socially or communicating well, things like problem solving, problem finding, and being able to think outside of the box, and all of these soft skills that don't get measured on standardized tests. But if you look at any list of what employers are looking for or what they're having a hard time finding, it's usually these soft skills. And really just our society in general needs more of these soft skills, people who can problem solve, who can think outside of the box, and who can communicate and work well with others. A lot of that is built through play. And our research, there's lots and lots of research that shows us that as children build social skills in these early years, those are more highly predictive of positive outcomes clear into their early adult years, actually, more so than so many other things that we tend to work on or worry about. It's those social skills, and play is just a key place for them to build those. So those are three main reasons, but there are so many more.
Yeah, no, I agree. Those are some good ones. You mentioned soft skills, and I think you mentioned two pieces that really stood out to me, right? We tend to, as a society, focus our attention in the things that are a little bit more measurable, tend to be what you see on standardized tests, those academic pieces, if you will. But then you bring in this topic, this conversation of soft skills. How do soft skills help promote those academic pieces and that academic success?
Yeah, absolutely. So those academic pieces are important. It's not to say that we don't care about them, right? But we have this tendency sometimes, the things that are easier to measure, which are academic skills, fairly easy to measure. We put a lot more emphasis on it, but there are a lot of things that matter that are hard to measure. And these soft skills are basically, that's that other category. And they come together because if you are great at these, we could call them concrete academic skills, the application of those skills requires the soft skills, right? So if I'm a brilliant surgeon, but I don't know how to think outside of the box or communicate well with other people or problem solve when things are going wrong, then my academic skills, those hard skills of being a good surgeon, aren't going to be used to their full capacity because I'm missing all these other pieces that allow me to put it to good use, right? So our soft skills are things like judgment as well. So all those executive functions that controlling your impulses, right? All of these things, if we can't do all of those soft things, then having all of the skills doesn't get you very far. I know it's kind of extreme, but sometimes when I'm teaching workshops, I'll say we don't need any more brilliant psychopaths, right? Like essentially that's an extreme end of it, right? But if you have to choose one or the other, we want people that definitely have the soft skills and then take whatever concrete skills they have, which will be varied, and that's what we need in a society, and they can apply them effectively because they have the soft skills that allow them to do that.
I love that. I actually wrote down application of the concrete skills relies on those soft skills. That's such, I think, a powerful statement and a great way to really connect those two worlds. I want to sort of expand this conversation a little bit. I think that sometimes there is perhaps a difference between having play as more of like a free play, less structured activity, and then certainly, particularly in early childhood settings, having play as a part of the school curriculum. What is the difference between the two? And then to sort of build on that, what's the importance, I guess, of the two as well?
Yeah. So play is a tricky thing to define, and you'll probably hear definitions from lots of different people, and sometimes they work together and sometimes there are little nuances. But it's one of those things that we can think of it, and many researchers do put it this way. Kathy Hirsch-Pasek is one who I adore. It's on a spectrum, really. So rather than saying, is it play or is it not play? There are many different types of play, right? So you mentioned play as a break, which is a valid type of play, right? For adults, we often look at things that way, right? That we get done with work and then we can go take a break and go for a walk or play tennis or whatever we do to give ourselves a break. And that sometimes applies for children, right? There are times when we go out for free play. Maybe it's recess if we think of the elementary school years. That's a free play, it's a break. And we know there are lots of benefits to that because there are certain benefits to play that are inherent to that experience. We also know from research that in some studies where they gave more frequent recesses in an elementary school setting, that those students actually were able to be more productive and more attentive when they were in session. So there are a lot of things that will tell us about the benefit of that type of play. So it is still valid, but where we, I think, sometimes miss, especially with early childhood, but it does apply even throughout the lifespan, is that play is not just something we do when we're done with work, right? That play is something that's integrated, and especially for early childhood, in the curriculum. So if I'm looking at a school that has integrated play into the curriculum, that doesn't just use play as a break, I would like to see something that has different areas of the room that allow for different types of play. So constructive play might be the building blocks, or Legos, different things like that. There's going to be dramatic play where they get to play dress up and interact with one another. There's sensory play. Often we see the sensory bin, right? Or different ways to do that. And outdoor play, and just a lot of different ways to play. And that's being used as a curriculum tool. So I often say that play is the method and learning is the outcome. So play is this tool that we can use in order to help them build all these developmental objectives, meet these developmental objectives, and build this base of knowledge that they need to learn by being hands-on and experiencing and having the guidance of adults who are in the room to prepare the environment and to have conversations with them. That drives really powerful learning. And that's using play as a tool where we use this set point that children already have to drive their learning through play. And we use that as a tool to help meet these objectives and knowledge points. And so we prepare an environment that does that. We engage them in play. To a child, or maybe even to somebody observing the classroom, it may look like just play, right? That they're just having a break all day long. But for an intentional teacher, they will tell you, they can look at that room and say, we're doing this activity because, we're doing that activity because, and I've prepared this activity in order to promote. And they will list off all of these objectives that are really intentionally woven into that prepared environment. So that's what happens when you're using play as part of the curriculum.
Absolutely. And so I think, and we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, right? I think sometimes there is perhaps a pressure to have certain academic skills met at a certain point and things of that nature. And I think that's a pressure that I certainly feel and have felt as an educator, certainly feel as a parent as well. What are some quick tips or guidelines or suggestions you can give parents and educators that are watching with us on how they can use play as that tool to perhaps foster and encourage a little bit more some of those skills?
Yeah, so if we're thinking about early childhood, a lot of those academic skills that we tend to think about have to do with things like numbers, letters. There's also an importance with sounds. Just hearing and playing with sounds is really critical, and communication in general, using words, thinking out loud, talking about ideas, and also exploring trial and error, kind of that whole scientific process in action. So all of those things can integrate into play. And a lot of that comes when we ask questions and engage them in conversations. Some of it, with numbers very naturally happens as we're playing with items. Children love to sort or move things around. So some of it is just the narration that we give and the natural conversation that we bring to that engagement as we engage with them as they play. So if you're concerned about learning numbers, then you can find natural opportunities to talk about, is this more or less than that? Or how many did you have on top of the truck? those different things and counting them together, or even in games, how often we count as a part of a game, right? And then, like I said, playing with sounds and words and just conversation. So any of those times that we're reading books, talking about books, singing songs, playing fun games. Children love to play these silly wordplay games, right? That just sounds like a joke to them, but it's really playing with these sounds, hearing the differences in sounds. So a lot of what we do just really naturally, as we play in those early years, we'll use those skills, and it takes an adult who's looking for them to support them and to bring those into that natural part of the conversation. It's actually more effective than if we sit them down and drill them. So for example, building vocabulary is a really big building block for early childhood. And we know one meta-analysis of multiple vocabulary programs said that those vocabulary programs that might use flashcards or videos, different things to teach words, not one of them was more effective than an experienced teacher, or I would add parent, in the classroom or home, who is engaging the children in conversations, just natural conversations, having a lot of conversational turns back and forth. That did a better job of building vocabulary than if we use flashcards. So that we just know that as we engage with children in play, that we can build all of those major building blocks in those early childhood years.
I think that's such an important piece you mentioned. As you're talking about building vocabulary, I'm immediately brought back to a recent experience with my youngest, who I can't even remember the word she said, quite honestly, but it was such a big word that I looked at her for a second and I'm like, how did you know how to use that, right? Like, how did you? And it was, for the most part, in an appropriate context. It was so interesting to me. And then she loves to talk. And so she's telling me the whole backstory about what happened with this friend and how the teacher got involved and where that word came up, right? But then she's bringing it home, and I think she was talking to her baby dolls. And I'm like, did she just say, and again, I don't remember what word it was, but it's so interesting because I knew she didn't learn it from, a flashcard or a video or anything like that. She was able to really paint the full picture for me, which was pretty exciting.
Yeah. We have multiple studies. I say often, if we just need to take what we know about how children learn and grow and make sure that that's what we actually do. And we have lots of studies that show that will say, if they just sit and do flashcards versus if they play and apply it or read a story and then play with it, it's just always more effective. And so even though in our minds, because maybe as adults, we learn better with that repetition and flashcards, those are great tools. We just know that for early childhood, those young children, it's experience, it's play. That's where they really learn effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about myself as a student, it's quite honestly how I learn more effectively.
Right.
In most situations, it's not usually what I'm presented with in a lecture or anything like that. So, all right. So one of the things we did with our first Nest Builders was some poll questions. And it's really exciting to get everybody listening to get your insight and your thoughts on these questions. So if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, you should be able to leave a comment and share some of your insight on this question that we have for you for the first poll. So our first question is, what are your core play memories from your own childhood? You want you to share with us what some of your core play memories are from your own childhood. And as we wait for those to come in, I will share. I was looking at this question and I was like, man, what is mine? And I remember when I was growing up, I went to a home daycare, childcare for many years. And one of my core memories from there was making the popsicles in the little plastic holders. Like, to the point now that when my girls see them in a store, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm instantly brought back to the flavors that we always made, the excitement we felt after that rest time in the afternoon where we got to finally have them, right? They were frozen enough to have. And then we talked about the soft skills, the problem solving that I had to go through to decide which flavor am I going to have this time, right? Like, and at that point, that was like my big concern. That was my big struggle as a child, right? Am I going to pick the chocolate with pudding, or am I going to pick the orange juice flavored one, right? So it was interesting to think back on that question, because I was like, wow, like I'm really thinking through a lot of the skills that I had to work on just in that simple situation. And I'm sure there was lots of math and measuring and lots of science as we made the pudding mix and saw what happened when it wasn't frozen and then we left it in the freezer for a little while.
It's like one big science experiment, right?
It was, yeah. But it's so funny because that wasn't the first part of the experience that I recalled. It was that like, oh my gosh, now I've got to really weigh my options, right? I've got to make a decision. I've got to practice that. And, really, if I want both, I've got to sort of problem solve my way through how I overcome that and make a decision as to which popsicle I'm going to have that afternoon.
That's a big deal.
It was a big deal. What about you? What's one of your core memories that you remember?
I think what I often go right back to, it's outside. It's always outside.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a rural area. And I had 5 brothers and sisters. So there was a lot of time just running around, out on the pasture and creating everything was in an alternate universe, right? That everything was a new storyline every day. I remember one in particular, tiptoeing past what was actually just like some old equipment, I think, that had been there for decades and rusted out. And we were tiptoeing past it because that's where the sleeping giant was. And we needed to get down to the pond where we loved to catch the tadpoles and bring them back. But I just remember that part of there's a sleeping giant that we had to weave that in. We have to sneak past. We can't wake him up or he'll chase us. And everything was a story. And we just lived it out every day, just a new story.
That's amazing. We've got some coming in. We've got some playing outside in the yard. We've got a couple that recall playing school or playing that teacher role. We've got making mud pies, which is a great one. Mm-hmm. And then the smell of grass and dirt on a baseball field.
Doesn't that just come right back for so many people? If that is one of your memories, you get all the senses with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think this leads so perfectly into our next discussion topic. But first, I thank everybody who shared with us some of their core childhood memories. I know they're precious and really fun to reflect back on. But it ties right into this next piece, Amanda, is what are children learning during play?
Yeah. So one of the things I love asking that question in a workshop when I'm with a group of parents or teachers. And when I start to ask adults about those core childhood memories and we give them some time to talk about it. And I think some of the people who shared those here might relate as well. What I see is eyes start to light up and faces start to light up and people smile and they get excited and they're laughing and it just the whole tone of the room changes, but literally their faces change. And what I like to remind people is that this change that you see on the outside is representative of what happens in the brain. During play, the brain effectively lights up, right? That it is working at a better level than when it is bored or when it is overly stressed, which we know that there's something people call an affective filter that makes it so that we can't really process information. So everyone can relate to that, to when they've been so overwhelmed or stressed that things just don't even make sense anymore. So the opposite of that is in play, where it just lights it up and helps us to make those connections. So one of those things is just generally that we're making more connections. Our brain is functioning at a higher level. But as we play, there's, again, general skills. So things like decision making. So that's why it promotes those soft skills, because you have to make decisions. You have to figure out how to negotiate with your friends. You have to figure out how to have what you want now and preserve what you want later, like you did in your case, or how to navigate through a physical challenge, right? To climb up and over something or get through something. And you're making a lot of decisions about how to take just enough risk, but stay safe, and how to manage your body, all of those things. So there's some general benefits that we have with play, but then we have really specific ones depending on the type of play that someone's engaging with. So let's take dramatic play, for example, because I know that's one as a teacher that I would have parents say, my kid just plays dress up all day long and I don't really see how they're learning. So let's pick that one, because we all relate to that and we remember it as being really fun for us. But what a child is doing when they play dress up or dramatic play, they're acting out a story, for one. So they're acting out, creating, and building a story. That requires language skills, social negotiation skills, and a narrative form, right? So this is a pre-literacy activity as well. They're also having to take on, this is actually a really complicated thing. It gets me super excited. They have to take on someone else's mind, essentially, right? So if as a child, I'm playing the mom, I have to think about not how I would respond to things, but how a mom would respond to things. And maybe that is my mom, or maybe that's a conglomerate of many moms that I've observed. And so what they're doing as they do that, they are thinking outside of their mind to another mind. So that's a social skill that is emotional, right? That I can think of how this might impact someone differently than it would me. That's a big social and emotional skill for a young child to have. It's also, again, back to literacy skills. It's being able to think through another character in the story that is not you and how they might respond to something that could be different than you. These are all really higher level thinking skills, right? They also have to, again, there's the social, so many social aspects where they have to negotiate the story with one another. They often have to problem solve because they don't agree or they can't find the right materials. They do a lot of symbolic representation. So when you see a child who picks up a block and says, this is a phone, and they start using it like a phone, even though it's just a block, that symbolic representation is, again, a really high level thinking skill, which we use when you think about it. Anytime you read, you're reading symbols that don't actually show what you mean. They represent something that you want to say. Same with our numbers that we write down. Those numerals represent quantity. So all of these things are symbolic representation. Children do that all the time in pretend play. Then, of course, there's the creative thinking, right? That they're thinking outside of the box or using their imaginations. All of those are really powerful and important things for young children. And then on top of that, we have the physical aspect of it. So often if they're actually getting dressed in something, doing dress up, they might be working with buttons or other fasteners. They might be having to use different materials in the play. So maybe they have to take notes and write something down. So they're using physical skills, fine motor skills, and large motor skills. And then again, some of that pre-writing. If I'm pretending to take your order, even if I'm not writing real words, if I get my piece of paper and I start scribbling on it, that is a developmental stage of writing. Just knowing that when I put a mark on here, that represents what you just said. So just in one little experience for a young child playing dress up, which we might think is cute or fun, there are a multitude of developmental skills that they are practicing and working on. And some of them are really actually very high level, really important things.
Yeah, you mentioned the scribbles, and that is one of the things I love the phrase, like, their scribbles matter, right? Those early scribbles matter. Truly wish that I saved more of them from my girls, right? Just because I want to remember what that stage looked like. I want to remember the potato person that they were drawing, and we're drawing people with all the parts and things like that. The other piece that I want to dive into here, because I think it is super important, is you keep mentioning there's a lot of social and emotional learning that's happening in children's play. Certainly, some of that comes with some social struggles and challenges. So whether we're in the classroom or parents are on play dates, what are some ways that, because some of them are hard, right? Some of them can make us as parents, cringe a little, right? We don't want to see our child hitting somebody else or shoving or any of those things when we're in those play date experiences. What are some strategies? What are some tools that you have to offer that can really help navigate through that without panicking, right? And
yeah, that's a big perspective shift that I had to have as a parent and as a teacher, because we as adults, we all want everything to go perfectly and to have zero conflict and everything's just great, right? We would love it if every day went that way, but it doesn't, because that's reality, but also because our children need that there's a certain amount of healthy conflict that our children need experience working through. And so once I could just realize and accept that, then it shifts it from how do I stop any conflict from happening ever, because that's not going to happen and it's not going to help our children, and more towards how can I help them to build the skills to get through those types of conflicts. So that's one of the first things, is just understanding that. And by understanding that, that reminds us that it's not our jobs to just swoop in and fix everything. That's a temptation, but that robs them of that opportunity. So we as adults, we're really good at fixing all those problems because we get all the practice, right? So we need to share that practice. So that's one of the first things. There's obviously times when it's gotten to a level where we do have to exert a little bit more, insert ourselves a little bit more. But generally what I advise people do is get down on their level, first of all, and kind of help to calm the situation first. And of course, make sure everyone is safe. But then it's walking them through those steps that we tend to do automatically, and just get them involved in describing what's going on, what can we do, and evaluating how did that go. That's a really simple 3-step problem solving, and there's many steps within those steps. But if I just start with, tell me what's going on, or I see, and then describe what you're seeing. I see that your friend looks really upset, helping them to see and recognize what's going on, and then sharing ideas, help me to understand what's going on, and then how can we fix the situation? What could we do that might be a better idea? And getting them in on that discussion. A few things that help there is sometimes whether you're saying what's going on or what could we do, you'll have someone share something and the other one then argues, right? And so something that really helped me was reminding them, well, right now we're just listening to each other. So right now I'm going to listen to Sam, and in a minute I'm going to listen to you, but let's make sure we hear what Sam has to say first. And then I really want to hear what you have to say too. What we're doing is we're modeling a really important skill that we need more of right now, right? Which is I can listen to you, even if we're not going to agree with Sam's idea. Sam's idea might not be the one we go with, but we're going to listen to Sam first. Let's listen and hear what Sam has to say. So we're modeling that and walking them through that, which tends to sometimes just the fact that we slow down that process often brings that emotion down a little bit as well. And then helping them to agree on what could we do. And if they're not coming up with ideas that work, instead of me saying, well, here's what we're going to do. Sometimes what I would say is, well, I actually learned this from a school counselor who was fantastic. She would say, you know what some kids do, or you know what works for some kids. And then she would share her idea. So rather than saying, well, I know what works and it's this, she would just say, well, here's what some kids do. Do you think maybe we could try that? And then they could decide on how they maybe want to change it a little or try that. And then always follow up, stay close and follow up, and either say, oh, you guys, this doesn't quite look like it's working either. Let's go through that process again. Mm-hmm. Or this is just as important to say, wow, you guys are doing such a great job. I love seeing you play together this way. So there's a lot of other steps we could work into that, but it's really just slowing down the process and kind of thinking out loud ourselves to model the process of social problem solving rather than swooping in and trying to fix the problem or squash it and not have any conflict. It's engaging them in the process that is really powerful for them, and in the long run more effective, because either I'm going to spend all my time fixing all the problems for my entire life, or I take a little bit more time in that problem to help coach them through it. And eventually I'm working myself out of a job because I'm giving them the skills to do the problem solving on their own. And that's really what I want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because soon it'll be a bigger problem that they face for sure. But at least they'll have the skill set and the ability to process and work through that. All right, it is time for our second poll question. And so this one, again, for those of you that are viewing where you can leave comments, please do. But this one is, how do you think that play has changed for children today versus your own experiences that you shared with us? And Amanda, I'm going to open this up to you as just a general question to talk about a little bit while we wait for some responses to come in. In your line of work, how have you seen play shift and change most recently today as we see it in comparison to perhaps what it was when you first started in the field, or even your own play experiences as a child?
I think there's our obvious ones that often come up, right? Technology changes a lot of things, and some of our concerns about safety, but I think a lot of that's just a broader issue within community, right? Communities aren't quite the same. So I would hear a lot of people saying, we just played outside with the neighbor kids for hours and hours and hours all day. Well, part of that was a lot of shifts in our culture, things around that. But part of it was because the street was lined with somebody who was home, right? There's just a different makeup in who was home during the day and how we see our neighbors and the communities that we've built. And so sure, you could wander to the end of the street because I know Betty lives at the end of the street. And if you're not behaving yourself, she'll take care of it too, or she'll let me know that you need help, all of those things. So those often come up. But I think most recently, what has really been striking to me is as I talk to different schools and programs directors, I would say what is becoming increasingly common that I didn't used to hear was that they are seeing children who don't know what to do. They don't know how to play. They don't know how. And I don't know that it's fair to say they don't know how to play. More so what they're seeing is children that come in and are waiting to be told what to do. Or are waiting to be invited to play. So it's entering play, it's initiative, those types of things. I think I'm hearing more about that shift probably than just about anything else. Children coming in and they're just kind of like, I don't know what you want me to do.
Yeah. And what do you recommend? What are some things that we can do to help them overcome that?
Yeah, so it's a similar thing. It's that coaching, right? So getting side by side and saying, "Does that looks pretty fun, doesn't it? What do you think you could do?" Or, um, "Would you like to play with those children? Would you like me to help you ask them if you can join with them?" And then saying, "Jesse here would really love to play. Can you help him understand what you're doing? And he can join you," right? So it's that same coaching process, and then some of it backing up even earlier, especially from a parent's perspective, is recognizing that children need to build that experience with taking initiative and having autonomy. So even earlier on, before their school experience, is getting them the social experience of playing with others. But it's also giving them opportunities to make age appropriate choices, especially about how they spend their day. So if I'm, again, if my mindset is that I just need to keep the peace and keep them busy and keep them entertained, I might just put them in front of screen after screen after screen. And while a limited amount might be okay, if I'm doing that constantly, they're not learning how to take initiative and to drive and direct their own play. So recognizing that we need to make space for that, because that is one of the most age appropriate ways for them to take initiative and have agency, is by allowing them appropriate spaces and time for play. And so a lot of it is just having that experience of knowing how to make those choices on their own.
Absolutely. And you mentioned TV and screens. That certainly has come up. One of the comments that we got in from this question is that technology play is more common than going outside, than being outside. Um, Talk a little bit about, from your perspective, perhaps maybe what some value you see in the technology play or the technology type apps and things like that that are out there, and certainly how we balance that, right? How do you balance that as a parent and as an educator?
Yeah, that is always a huge challenge, right?
Mhm.
Again, it's one of those things that'd be nice if we could just say, my kids aren't going to use screens at all. And some people are able to pull that off. Kudos to you, right? But I also want parents to know you're not going to ruin your child if you let them have an appropriate amount of screen time. And I think what I would look for is first, the quality of what is there, right? So for me, well, there've been studies, so it's not just me, that talk about the pacing in a program. So really rapid pacing that's really frenetic has a more detrimental effect on children than a really slow pacing. So Mr. Rogers is the key example of that. So it may not be Mr. Rogers per se, but something that has that slow pacing is better for young children. What is it that they're talking about? What is it that they're doing, right? Is it something that is engaging because it's flashing? Or is it engaging because they're taking their time and letting them think about things, or exposing them to words, right? So there's the quality of what it is, for starters. The other thing that I look for, though, is I feel like technology is one piece of several other elements that we see in our culture and our society right now, especially with young children. That is what I say. I say that there's pervasive passivity. So it's putting children over and over in this passive position where they're just going to sit back and have things are going to happen, right?
Mhm.
So anytime that I can either minimize how passive their experience is,
Yeah.
or engage them in some kind of active piece to that, then that's going to be better. So, for example, Sesame Street is a great program, but it's even better for children who are sitting with a parent and the parent engages in conversation about what they're seeing. So that's something that we just know for a fact, that a child watching Sesame Street, that's okay, but a child watching Sesame Street with a parent having conversation, so much more powerful. So there's that active piece where it's not just a passive activity, but we're engaging together, having conversations about whatever it is that they're doing. So yeah, I look for things that are less passive, and more engaging, and opportunities for me to engage as well in that conversation.
Absolutely. Love those tips, actually. Some good ones. Like you said, it's hard because we live in a technology world, right? I mean, we're doing this with technology.
Right.
So we depend on it in a lot of ways, and certainly want to make sure that you teach, the safety things and things like that to your child and your children, because eventually technology is going to come into their world at some point. The other ones that we're getting in, we've got one that talks a little bit about no more creative play, no opportunity for creative play, and just more heavy on the adult guidelines. I know we talked about giving them opportunities to make choices, appropriate choices, certainly. Anything else you want to add in terms of lack of creative play?
Yeah, I think, I have similar questions when I do workshops with teachers and parents, and a lot of these same things come up. And I think what's important to recognize is while we do see less creative play, less agency within that play, that the reality is that those things are still available. So while we bemoan that that's the way culture has moved, and there's some truth to that, that within our own homes, we get to make choices about that there are still so many avenues for creativity, and some with technology that allow us creativity we could never have done before.
Mm-hmm.
And that it allows us, we can use those as tools. That's something I tell my kids all the time. They're older now, but I still use the phrase, right? Are you using it as a tool or as a toy, right? Is it just to entertain you, or is it going to enhance what it is that you want to do? So part of that is recognizing we can sit and complain about how things have changed, or we can just use that as something we're aware of and then make conscious choices. That if I feel like there's less creative play, then I'm going to make choices about what I bring into my home that would inspire more creative play. I think because we have access to so much, we can give children so many different things. And one thing that I like to remind teachers and parents alike is that we shouldn't underestimate their ability to be creative and to imagine. So rather than giving them 45 different types of food play, keep it really simple and let them imagine what type of food this imaginary food is, right? Or with dramatic play setups, that sometimes there's every detail. And I think some of that is from, what we have access to, but especially with Pinterest, that we get to be creative and use Instagram and Pinterest ideas to make this set display for our dramatic play look so real and so close to exactly what we imagine that they would have. But some of my best dramatic play areas, it was a spaceship, it was a rocket ship, but all it really was like a blanket over a table and an old stereo that had knobs and lights that they could move around on, and letting them imagine and contribute to it. So let things be imperfect, I guess, is what I'm saying. Let it be imperfect and let them take some ownership in creating some of these things. And don't, I think sometimes because we have this really connected world through social media, which is great, that sometimes as parents or teachers, we might feel a little bit of guilt about things not being perfect and not being fancy and, all of those things. But the reality is that we're leaving space for children to be an active part of it by not, if I complete everything myself, make everything look perfect, everything is taken care of, it's all picture perfect, Instagram worthy, right? That I'm not leaving a lot of space for the child to use their own imagination, use their own agency. So I think it's kind of a comforting and encouraging thought when we realize that, kind of relaxing a little bit, taking that deep breath and realizing that when we give some of that space and when we let go of some of that perfectionism, we're actually creating space for children to have more agency and more creativity, and that in the long run is so much better than us doing everything perfectly for them.
Oh, I love that. I do have a follow-up question, but I have one more big topic that I want to dive into. So I'm going to wait to ask it for the final Q&A session and hope I don't forget it.
Okay.
Because I do want to dive into this last piece here. We're living in a, knock on everything, pretty post-COVID world, right? We all just went through a pretty interesting time over the last few years. And I think as we've all gotten, our children back into school, whether that's elementary and grade school, or it's in those early childhood settings, I feel like there's really been a lot of talk about getting children back on track, particularly as it pertains to their academics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is play still important in this context?
Yeah, I think first of all, we do have to be really honest about that and recognize that there was a really big impact on our children during that time. So I don't want in any way to give this idea that we can just brush that off. We really need to pay attention to that for sure. But one of the things we really have to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about our youngest learners, is we have to think about what is it that they missed out on, right? So what was it? How were they impacted during those few years? And if we're talking about our 5, 4, and 3-year-olds, and we're moving that back 3 years or so, they were infants and toddlers. And so really what happened in those 3 years, they weren't missing out on academic exposure so much as they were missing out on play and social engagement and conversation. And so I worry that sometimes in this well-intended move towards helping children catch up, that we're pushing out what got pushed out, right? That what they really need is more of that play and engagement, social interaction, conversation. I would really focus on those things. A lot of what I'm hearing from programs that have children coming in post-COVID, they're very rarely saying, wow, these kids don't know how to read. I haven't heard anybody say that, but I've heard a lot of people saying they're having a hard time playing with other children. They're having a hard time with behavior which is another avenue of that social emotional, right? So I think that's one of the first things to keep in mind is that if we keep pushing out what they got less of, that's not going to fix the problem. The other is recognizing that, again, if we go to early childhood studies, and the Tennessee Pre-K study is a prime example, that when we look at some of those studies where they try to help children catch up academically, in the Tennessee Pre-K study, what they found was, again, that I think essentially, Del Farron was one of the lead researchers, and one of the things that she says happened was that essentially we ended up giving these pre-K students kind of like elementary school light. We just kind of pushed down academic things to try to help them catch up. And what they were finding was those children actually did worse as time went on than the children who were not in the program. And so essentially some of what she asserts is similar to what we just talked about, that we have this well-intended idea that we can help children catch up by giving them something different than the children who don't need extra help got, right? So pre-COVID, what did children get in those infant toddler years? Lots of play, social interaction, conversation. So why do we think we push that out, push down academics, and get something different out of it? So I worry that we, in pushing down academics, are actually causing more damage than we are helping. What these children, what every child needs, is those foundational skills that come through play, social interaction, and conversation. And it's often easy for us as adults to kind of dismiss or overlook how powerful those simple things are because they are so simple, but we kind of take them for granted. And we have studies upon studies upon studies that show us that in the early childhood years, those are some of the most powerful drivers of development. And so if we're seeing children in the early years who are showing some post-COVID delays, it's usually not a lack of flashcards. It's usually a lack of these enriching experiences that we kind of clamped the world down. And for some children, they still got lots of experiences. And for some, there were just a lot of factors that made it really hard for them to get everything that they needed in the form of play, conversation, and interactions.
I love what you said in terms of really recognizing what they missed, right? What got left out in those years. Because one of the things that I always try to remember as both a parent and certainly in the work that I do is it is okay for us to change perhaps the perception of what early education should be, right? And really refocus on those pieces that truly were missed, right? And you hit it right on the head, right? For some of these children that are now coming back into our settings, perhaps they didn't have siblings at home to play and interact and engage with. We also know for those that did, siblings are different than the peers inside your classroom, right? We tend to push their buttons a little bit more. So I think you said so many really important things, and it's okay as parents and as educators to really shift that focus and recognize that they missed a huge window of time to focus on some key social, emotional learning opportunities because of what we went through with COVID, right? And it was certainly challenging. They're very resilient young children, but it didn't make the experience any less challenging for them. Thank you for that. That was some great wisdom on that topic. So we are getting close to the end. I'd like to open it up to our viewers to ask some of their questions. So if you have any questions that you want to ask Amanda while we have her, please put them in the comment section. I'm happy to relay and then carry on a good conversation about them. I will go with one of mine while it's still on my head while we're waiting for them to come in. Before I forget, we had talked about lack of creative play. In situations where I think in my experiences, both again as a parent and as an educator, sometimes the thought of creative play sounds messy and chaotic, right? Thinking of letting paint cups be open and Play-Doh, slime, all of those things that really might allow for some creativity and some real interaction with some messy materials can be a little challenging for some people, right? And I get that. I certainly have that thing where I'm like, oh my gosh, I just don't want that to get everywhere, right? What are some suggestions for sort of overcoming that?
Yeah, I think some of it is recognizing that you can still set boundaries, right? So if in my house, you can have slime, you can have all kinds of messy things, but there are certain places that you can have it and other places that it doesn't go in the living room, right? And so I think getting clear with yourself on what those boundaries are for you and then communicating that really clearly to your children. And so sometimes that would mean for me, I would have children painting in the bathtub because that was the easiest place to clean up. So if that's where you feel the most comfortable, then do that. Or outside, go have a mess outside and maybe make it really clear we only play with this outside if that's where you're most comfortable. Sometimes it means spreading out a sheet on your kitchen floor and you have a bin of rice or something that they get to play in and just letting them know the rice stays in the bin. I wouldn't even say it stays on the sheet. Your sheet is your buffer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then that makes it, I can teach them there's room for error for them to, have some little spills. And then for me, it's just so much easier to then shake it all together in the sheet and clean it up. So it's thinking through what is it that makes me feel uncomfortable and how can I create some boundaries and buffers to help the child be successful and for me to feel more comfortable, which is it's good for those children to be given some of those boundaries and buffers so that they can learn. I mean, that's part of problem solving, right? How can I do this and not fling it across the room? That's a skill that they get to learn. So it's completely fair. Don't feel that you're ruining somehow that creative experience by putting reasonable boundaries on it. And it's absolutely okay if you really only feel comfortable doing it outside, then do that. Go outside and bring all the paints, bring all the Play-Doh, bring whatever it is so that you can find a place where you can explore and have that experience with them and let them be creative. I think also don't underestimate some things like just water and a paintbrush, a cup of water with a paintbrush. Take that outside and go paint with water. Children will do that forever. And so I think there's some really simple things that sometimes we underestimate and think, it has to be this big, grand, hugely messy thing. And then just kind of pare it back a little bit and look for some of those simple things and recognize that children still have a wonderful experience with that.
Absolutely. All right, I've got another question for you. What is the best way to get children out of the habit of screen time?
Ooh, that's so tricky. I would say one of them is when we talk about habit, we're kind of talking about routines, right? So if it's become routine to have an iPad at the table while they eat, then we just have to set a new routine and kind of break the habit that's already there. When we do that, it's easiest to replace with something else. So if I'm just expecting my child to not have the iPad there, that might create some friction. But if instead I say we're not going to have the iPad here during mealtime or during whatever time it is, instead we're going to fill that in, right? So instead I'm going to read out loud to you while you have it, or I'm going to sit here and have a conversation with you. Or we're going to do some painting, right? We're going to do something else. So I think one of the ways is, I guess the two things is to replace it with something else and to create that routine. So again, if it's around meal times or bedtimes, times of day, right? Then there are certain times that maybe this is our screen time. We're going to make sure that it's just a consistent part of a routine so that we are putting it in its appropriate place and context and time limits. And then we're going to fill other things into a routine that are going to replace that. So that we know now this is story time, or now this is Play-Doh time, or now this is, we used to do that, but now we do this, and create a new rhythm.
Kind of building off of that, and I know I certainly have felt this anytime I've had to change up routines of any sort, really. Sometimes there's that newness, right? So that first day or two, children may be excited because you've got that new routine and it's new and it's exciting. How do you remain consistent, or what are some tips for remaining consistent when that newness wears off and perhaps they become a little bit more resistant or upset by this new routine?
Some of that depends on the child, so how old they are, or different personalities. Sometimes it might take suggestions from them. So it doesn't seem like you're very interested in this book so much anymore. Then you get to decide as the parent, whether I offer to say, hey, do you want to pick a new one? And we'll start that one instead. Or when we finish this one, how about you pick the next one, right? So giving them some agency, and you as the parent, you get to decide where that boundary is. I can't tell that there's one right way or the other. So getting input from them. And then some of it is, like you mentioned, sometimes the problem is that the novelty has worn off. So sometimes it's just finding another way to inject novelty, right? So maybe we're going to have story time again, but now we're going to read outside. We're going to read under a table. Like that's a huge big deal to children, but we're just moving the location, right? So looking around to see, where can I give them choices and how can I make it new in really small ways? Maybe you read in a funny voice, or maybe you can do the same routine in a new way, but you're keeping that block consistent.
That's awesome. No, I love that. I love that. My last one, and I think it sort of will tie everything that we've talked about tonight together really well. I do feel like, and again, I speak from my own experience, that there is the parent panic is real, especially this time of year. It can feel very real. I have my youngest is going into kindergarten, and you start to feel those, did I do enough to prepare them? Are they ready? Did I give them all the skills and things that they need? Again, things that I certainly felt probably a little bit more with my oldest, and learned along the way for my next one, but still equally nervous in some ways. What sort of advice do you have for parents? Do you have for early childhood educators who might feel that sense of panic of, did I do enough? Did I prepare them enough to be ready for that next phase?
Yeah. So I think of two things right off. We actually were talking before this. My oldest is getting ready to head to college. So this parent panic of, did I do enough? Right. That does not go away in any way, right?
Telling me it doesn't go away.
Right. So, but one thing that I have learned as I've asked myself, did I do all the things, is what I tend to ask. And I've realized, no, it's impossible to do all the things. And that's good, because the whole point is for them to keep moving forward and learning and growing. And so every child at every phase of their life is going to be really strong in certain areas and have other areas where they're ready for growth. We want that because we want them to have room for growing. And we want, as they come together in groups, in classrooms, in communities, to share different strengths and help each other with different weaknesses. And so I think as a parent, we want to know that we did all the things and that our child is, all the things straight across the board. They have all the competencies in the world. But kind of like our conversation with conflict, the reality, first of all, is that that's not going to happen. And second of all, is that it's a good thing it doesn't, because that's what creates room and motivation and capacity for growth. And that's really what we want. The other thing that comes to mind is recognizing that often what we think is necessary is a little bit skewed, especially with early childhood, that as they prepare for preschool, pre-K, kindergarten, really the most important things for those children, I would say the most important skills when people ask me as a teacher, and I think this is helpful for teachers as well to have that perspective, is I would hope that I had children who were curious and excited to learn. That was one of the most important things, who had learned at least some, and I'm not expecting them to be perfect, but who have learned that it's important to be kind and to work together with others. And that while they may not be perfect at it, are trying to be, right? That they're learning, they're aware of it. So the social aspect, and then just really basic self-control skills, just again, not expecting them to be perfect, but that they're starting, that they're trying. That's really what I'm looking for. I wasn't looking for children to come into kindergarten or preschool or first grade even knowing all of everything, right? Then what fun is that if we don't get to learn something, if they already know everything? I wanted children who were excited to learn, and excited to be with other people. If I could even have just those two things, that's where we start to build. So I think just helping both parents and teachers to take some of that pressure off, because those children are right where they need to be at that age. It's just a jumping off point for so much growth and learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the love of learning is huge, right? You got to love and want to do those pieces. Thank you, Amanda. Believe it or not, an hour has gone by. It is time to wrap up our second episode. And I say, believe it or not, we knew this would happen, right? You have been such a wonderful guest, and I truly, truly can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, answering all of our questions, and just being a part of this event with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It is always a pleasure to do anything associated with the Nest Schools. You guys are doing such a fantastic job. So thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you. You can, as a viewer, learn more about Amanda and her company and the work she does at Not Just Cute by visiting her website, www.notjustcute.com. She also is the host of a podcast called Not Just Cute Podcast, which is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, whatever your favorite platform is to listen to. Be sure to check that one out. I can attest there's some great episodes on there, some really awesome information. So just be sure to take some time to check out all the wonderful information Amanda has to offer as parents and educators on any of those platforms that she has there. In the meantime, as we close out, I do want to encourage you to mark your calendars for episode 3. We are gearing up for episode 3, which will happen September 19th. It'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern, same way you access this one and the first one, so Facebook, YouTube, and our website. We will be joined by pediatric sleep consultants Lauren and Bridget from Little Snoozers. You can register for the event using the link that will appear here on the screen in just a moment, or by visiting our website, www.thenestschool.com/nestbuilders. And until next time, everybody, thank you so much for joining and have a wonderful evening.